Hello and welcome back to the UK edition. Past all that Valentine's stuff, we won't have to think of that saint of dubious love for another year, thankfully. So what's new in town? Well, what is new and almost here is Gurinder Chada's new film Viceroy of India, a look at a very loaded political past that is certain to be controversial. Did Muhammad Ali Jinnah enter into a secret conspiracy with Winston Churchill to partition India and create Pakistan long before Mountbatten appeared? Well, that is the suggestion running through this film. Let's get a flavor of this film and then we'll share a chat ahead with Gurinder Chada.
I am to be the last Viceroy of India, and I shall carry out the role with great pride.
You're giving a nation back to its people. How bad can it be? You're in the future.
We are.
Then let's not make a mess of it.
Jeet Kumar, sir. He's the new boy.
We have something in common there.
You think India is ready to rule itself?
We've learned from the best.
From now on, there'll be more Indians of all faiths round our table.
We can change a lot, and we absolutely have to.
You'll wear yourself out.
I mean, I'll wear you out.
300 million Hindus and Sikhs want a united India. 100 million Muslims do not.
You dance with your own kind.
My own kind.
Have some respect.
New nations are rarely born in peace.
It's got to be a clean cut. It's a bloody axe cleaving right through people's lives.
Well, whatever their differences are, all Indians have one thing in common.
What's that?
They can't wait to get rid of us.
Your father taught me the future is what we make it.
We are brothers with one soul. To divide us on religious grounds is against the will of God.
Without peace, all other dreams vanish and are reduced to ashes.
India is a ship on fire.
I don't know what to do.
We belong together.
You have used me and my family.
We came to give India back her freedom, not to tear her apart.
Gurinder, you make a bold suggestion in the film that the plan for partition was drawn up by Churchill 2 years before Mountbatten even stepped into India. How do you establish that?
Well, the film is based on two books, Freedom at Midnight and Shadow of the Great Game by Gurinder Suri. Gurinder had been in the British Library in 1997 and had come across these top secret British documents from 1945 and 1947 that started telling a very different history to what we had always been brought up with in terms of partition. I had always been brought up with the English version at school, which was somehow partition was our fault because Mountbatten had come to India to hand India back, but because we started fighting, he had no choice but to divide the country. When I started researching this, I found the opposite to be true. That actually partition was a political act, and that post-war in 1945, while Churchill was in power as the Prime Minister, the British were very nervous about what was going to happen to Asia, and they had promised to hand India back. But what was that going to cost them in terms of strategic and military positioning within Asia?
So was Mountbatten's arrival in India and that assignment given to Radcliffe to draw up that partition map just a charade?
It seems like it if you look at the facts. I think Mountbatten was chosen to come out as a viceroy because he was not a particularly astute politician. He was a naval officer, he was a royalty. He was very interested in the pomp and splendor that went with that. In the film, we show how he's very concerned about his medals and his uniform and how precise everything has to be in terms of his dress. He was no doubt charming, and he did think through charm he could talk to the leaders. But very soon he realized that his charm was not going to work. And I think that he really was out of his depth. And it was only later that he perhaps realized what actually was going on around him.
And so does this mean that Jinnah was secretly hand in glove with Churchill to partition India?
The evidence that we have is that there is correspondence between Churchill and Jinnah, where they met for lunch at Claridge's here in London during the war. They were having meetings, and in one of the letters, Churchill actually says to Jinnah that we should stop meeting in public. It's not going to go down very well if Congress hears about it. And so from that, we know that there was a relationship. We also know that Jinnah was very, very unwilling to negotiate in any shape or form. And to us, that suggests that a deal had been made. According to the author, Narinder Singh Mehra, he felt very strongly that a deal had been made with Jinnah at one of the conferences around partition with Stafford Cripps. And he didn't have the evidence to prove that, but he felt that at that point, Jinnah represented for them a way for the British and the Americans to get what they wanted, because they knew they wouldn't be able to do a deal with Nehru in the same way. Also, they felt that Nehru was very left-leaning and close to the Soviet Union. And at that point, post the war, for Britain and America, the Soviet Union was perhaps going to be a problem for them. And so what we're looking at is really the beginning of the Cold War, but we're also looking at a period where we had a very old great game happening already. So partition really became part of the discourse of those maneuvers and those machinations.
Why are most people not aware of this?
Well, I think that partition is a subject that not many people want to talk about. I mean, in India and Pakistan, people don't really want to talk about it. It's something that's been just brushed under the carpet. And I think now, 70 years later, I think India and Pakistan want to move on from it. And I understand that, you know. I felt, for me, as a British filmmaker, with our shared history as British Asians, I felt it important to make this point because it had a direct effect on my family, and also why I'm here in this country and why I don't have a homeland. So I think that we're at a time now in Britain where the British are, you know, okay about looking at the past and looking at imperial history and British Raj history from a different perspective. I mean, Gandhi was the last film really on this subject in Britain, and that was 35 years ago. So now, 35 years later, we have a film from a British Asian perspective. And I think it's important for the British community as well as the Asian community, as well as for India and Pakistan. It's our shared history that we're looking at here, but more than that, I think the events of 70 years ago, in the way that I've described them in the film, it's important to see how geopolitics works, and it's an important lesson for today. You know, my film is a very timely reminder with what is going on in the world today, with the rise of politicians who are seeking to divide and rule, criminalize groups of people on the basis of their religion or their race, you know, or their language or whatever, and in criminalizing one group, empowering another. And it's through divide and rule that these tragedies happen. And as soon as you start that kind of politics of hate, it leads to destruction, and it inevitably leads to death. So we all lose in that scenario.
What is it about your personal family history that drew you into making this film?
Well, I grew up in England, never really having a homeland, because my homeland of my ancestors was Jhelum and Rawalpindi, and that was now a different country. That was Pakistan. That was no longer the India, the pre-partition India that belonged to my ancestors. So growing up here, I always felt that I didn't really have a homeland as such. Although for me, London is every bit my home now, and more than a homeland to me, particularly under our fantastic mayor. But I think that for me, there was always that. And also my mother always telling me that she just didn't know what happened, because growing up in Rawalpindi, she said, I had Muslim friends, Sikh friends, Hindu friends, Christian friends, and we all lived together happily. We all celebrated each other's festivals. We all celebrated each other's weddings, birthdays. Everybody lived together for thousands of years, side by side. And it just felt like overnight something happened. Someone put, black magic on us, she says. The English, she says, they did something overnight and everything changed. So I grew up with that as well. So I wanted to explore what she had always said to me.
Now you tell that people's story through the staff at Viceroy House. A very interesting inroad into that idea. What led you to picking Viceroy House as a sort of metaphor?
Exactly. My purpose in setting the film in Viceroy's house was so that I could tell the story of what was going on outside India, but through the metaphor of everything in this house. So upstairs, we follow the Mountbattens and the leaders negotiating, and then downstairs, we see the impact of their decisions on ordinary people. It was important for me to show the impact of this on ordinary people, like my grandmother, and people of, from all sides, of our community. But at the same time, I really wanted to tell the political story of, retelling our history from our perspective, because we very rarely get a chance to do that. And no one has ever done that really in this country on film. So the setting it in Viceroy's house allowed me to tell the upstairs story and the downstairs story within the metaphor of...
Finally, Gurinder, is this in some sense your most personal film?
I think all my films are personal in some ways. I mean, Bend It Like Beckham was really about myself and my dad, but I think this film is extremely personal in a very emotional way, in that I really feel that I am doing something here that is very important for my children and for generations to come. It's an opportunity here for not just us, but for the world to learn about a terrible event that happened 70 years ago, where 14 million people became refugees overnight. A million people died, in a space of a few weeks, that most of the world has no idea happened. In that respect, for those people really that sacrificed for our three nations, India, Pakistan, Britain, to be what they are today, people sacrificed for that. And in that respect, I feel very personally responsible and emotional about telling that story. So in that sense, yeah, it's a very personal film.
Thanks, Gurinder, for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
It is the political part of the film that will be more catchy. Was the real creator of Pakistan, its real Qaid-e-Azam, if you like, more Churchill than Jinnah? Gives us something to think about. But a quick break now, and then we'll return to the Indian flag made in more spectacular fashion and in far happier circumstances. Welcome back. And now, where on earth will you find an Indian flag made of tens of thousands of flowers and petals? An Indian peacock, elephant, tiger, auto rickshaw, and yes, an auto rickshaw is as Indian as the Indian elephant, all made of flowers and petals at Kew Gardens, at its Indian Orchids Festival. Let's get there.
Tens of thousands of flowers have gone into the creation of the Indian flag and much more at a never-before festival of Indian orchids at the Kew Gardens in London. Unique varieties of orchids grow in India, and these were flown over to add a unique touch to the orchids collection at Kew, the mecca of plant lovers around the country. The Indian festival was put together by Glasshouse manager Nick Johnson.
So this year is the year of culture between India and the UK, and so we decided to celebrate everything Indian and the Indian communities that live here in the UK by putting on a wonderful orchid festival that's based on displays, sights and smells that some of us have experienced in the wonderful country of India. So here you'll see we have a cycle rickshaw which is made using around about 40 or 50 different genera of orchids. We have Cymbidium, Dendrobium, we have Phalaenopsis in the background there. This is a cooler growing Dendrobium here called the cane Dendrobium. And behind you, you see as well a very small Indian elephant which is completely clothed in what we know as Tillandsia usnioides, or the Spanish moss, which is actually a member of the pineapple family. It's a bromeliad. The eyes of the Indian elephant are made from Aesculus indica, the Indian chestnut, which we have growing on our site in the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. Some of these Cymbidium orchids here that we have on display, these come from the south coast of the UK from a orchid nursery called McBean's. And in this case, this orchid is around about 20 to 25 years old. It produces, when it gets to a maturity like this, between 100 and 150 blooms through its blooming cycle. The Cymbidium is native to Southeast Asia, and you may see it in the eastern parts of the country growing on trees. Behind you, you'll see an Indian flag, which has been made from around about 3,600 cut chrysanthemum flowers. This took us approximately 5 days to make. Each flower is in its own tiny little vial of water to try to keep it alive for approximately 2 weeks. This is Aphiopedilum, and this is also known as the lady slipper orchid. The lady slipper orchid is wonderful in its complexity in what pollinates it as well. Really beautiful plants. So here in the central part of the glass house, we have approximately 3,600 orchids that we have put and mounted into our displays. If you have a look down the side here, you'll see all of the pillars that support the roof of the glass house are completely clothed in moth orchids, or Phalaenopsis. We've got around about 350 Phalaenopsis on each of the pillars, and there are 7 on this side of the glass house alone. Here we have a small kind of market setting. So we have Vanda caerulea, the blue vanda, is native to the eastern Himalayas. Here we're showing some of the hybrids from that particular species. We have baskets filled with flowers. We also have some Indian spices in this area so that you can smell some of the scents of India. And we have interpretation or signposts showing and telling people in the communities from London how the Indian communities use all of these plants in India. Here you have a tiny little bird that's been made from leaves, and Helichrysum, the Australian everlasting flower. This particular display here, we are calling the Samsara cone. For me to do a design for the pond is a great honour to do it about India, and I was inspired by my visits to India, where wherever you go in India, people always say to you, in India anything is possible. It's like a mantra. It's a wonderful saying, and it's so positive. So we tried to do something that looked impossible. We tried to make a 3-meter tall display, which is 2 meters wide at the top, resting on a single point on water. There's around about 400 different orchids in this display alone, and it's been colorized to represent the colors of the Indian flag. So we have white, we have green, and we have orange. See another one of our animals, a tiger made almost completely from moss. The stripes are made from Dracaena, which is one of the trees that we have in the glass house. The little teeth there are just the leaf bases of the Dracaena that's growing on the other side of the glass house. And again, his eyes are made from Aesculus indica, the Indian chestnut. So we're trying to be, in everything, mindful of the fact that we're doing a festival around India and the Indian subcontinent and the communities that represent. The blue of the peacock, we've cheated a little. It's very difficult to get blue flowers to last for an entire month in our festival. So we've actually used silk flowers for the blue part of the peacock, but the rest is all real. The Phalaenopsis in this environment won't last as long as the plants in the rest of the festival. So we will do an entire change of this tail of the peacock during the festival. Again, one of our beautiful moss cyclists doing his business. As you can see next to the rickshaw, we also have signage and interpretation to show the use of various different plants in the various communities that are found in India. This is a completely different family. It's not an orchid. This is Markgravia umbellata, and it's from Panama. It's pollinated by bats. Bats are attracted to this, and they climb down the side here and they poke their heads through to lick the nectar in these tiny little chambers here. And those chambers then ensure that these flowers are dropping pollen on the bat's head. Really interesting. There's a scent of vanilla with cinnamon, maybe some cardamom mixed in as well. And that scent comes from this tiny orchid here. It's one of the jewels in our orchid collection. This is Dendrochilum. Each one of those tiny flowers is an orchid flower, and the scent that they produce is really, really strong. Thank you very much for visiting the Orchid Festival. We hope that you'll come and visit us here and experience and smell and taste some of the wonderful environments that we have to show and the wonderful displays that we want to share with you.
That festival is on till early March, so you do want to think about making your way to Kew quickly enough. Well, that's it on the UK edition this week. Have a great week ahead, and we are here with you all the way on News 18.